This video describes the RBT for EMAP input file. This is a plain text XML file that is specified on the command line when you run the RBT, and it contains all of the data inputs that the RBT needs to run. I'm looking at one here inside Notepad++, a free text editor, but you can use any text editor of your choosing. Just plain old Notepad will do just fine. So inside the file, it is an XML file. There's a parent node called the RBT, and inside there is a sites node. Within sites, you can specify multiple sites. So you can, with this way, you can actually run multiple sites with a single RBT call. So you can repeat everything that's in the site tag here, repeat it for as many sites as you have, and then run the RBT once for all those sites. Each site must have a name. If there are spaces or characters in the name that can't be used for file generation, those will be stripped out, but I don't have any here. I've removed them already. Within each site, you must have a visit, and a visit represents a survey or an occurrence when you went to the field and collected the GIS data. And the visit has an attribute called calculate metrics, and this must be set to true. If you set this to any other value or false, the RBT actually won't do anything. It will read in your data, but it won't attempt to actually calculate any metrics. So that must be set to true. The visit must have a name, same as the site. It'll strip out any spaces or dangerous characters along the way. And a field season, which represents a year. This must be a numeric value, in this case 2011. Next is maybe the most important attribute in the file geodatabase. And this is the absolute path to your file geodatabase that stores all of the input GIS data. So your data must be in a file geodatabase. If it can't be in any other format. You can use ArcCatalog to create a file geodatabase if you need to. Then the following raster and feature class definitions are all relative, so they're all inside that file geodatabase. You have your digital elevation model, your DEM. This is a raster, and your topo points. These represent your survey points that have CHAMP protocol attributes in their attribute table, and that's explained in more detail on the website for the RBT for EMAP. And also your water extent points in another feature class. Again, these represent the left and right bank points of your survey in their own feature class. And these three data definitions are really the mandatory inputs to the RBT: your DEM, your topo points, and your edge of water. What follows are four more data sets that are optional. And if you don't specify them, if you omit these tags altogether, or if the RBT cannot find these GIS layers, it will create these things for you. So they're the Thalweg, which is a line down the deepest part of the channel, your water extent polygon, your center line, which is the center line down through your channel, and your bankfull polygon. If you have them and you want to use the ones that you've provided, specify them here inside your file geodatabase again. If you don't have them, you can omit these tags altogether and the RBT will generate them. If you specify them but then they actually don't exist, that's fine. The RBT will ignore those tags and generate them anyway. Notice how the tags are lowercase, but the names of the feature classes and rasters are actually all case sensitive. Okay, next follows a small section about the outputs of the RBT. There is a results file that contains all of the metric values, and this is going to be a plain XML file. And you specify where you want that file to be created here in the results tag. You'll do the same for a log file. This is again XML that outputs each of the steps of the RBT. It's useful for debugging. You can see the time when things occurred and get messages about any problems and missing data sets, etc. Note that for both the results and log, these files are overwritten on subsequent runs of the RBT. So if you produce these files and you want to keep them, rename them before running the RBT again, otherwise it'll overwrite the previous files. Next up is a temporary workspace location. The RBT produces a lot of temporary GIS data along the way, and this is where that'll all get put. I recommend that this is a folder somewhere on your computer fairly high up in the folder structure, preferably with no spaces in it. Those aren't too hard requirements. It's just we found that RBT more reliable if you don't have spaces in your folder paths, and it is fairly high up on your file system so that you don't end up with long path names. And finally, the artifacts path. There are key GIS outputs of the RBT that get produced, and you can have these put into a file geodatabase, and it will get put inside this artifacts folder on your computer. Okay, finally there's a parameters section, and most of these are not used by the RBT for EMAP, so I'm not even going to describe these first 5 values. They are not used by the RBT for EMAP. This last one is, though, within the intervals, there is a tag where you can specify what interval you want your cross sections to get laid out at. Okay, and for EMAP, you want 21 cross sections, which divide the channel into 20 equally spaced transects. And so your interval needs to have the value of 20, and it needs to be of type ratio. Ratio will basically divide your site length up by the number of intervals that you specify here. The last piece of this tag is the offset, which is the amount of distance on the end of your site that will be ignored. So if you have a long site and you want to ignore the 5 meters at the top and the 5 meters at the bottom of the channel, specify that offset here. This is useful if your channel narrows or tapers at one end and you want to ignore that from your RBT analysis because you think it represents a false constriction in the channel that you don't want in your data. So you basically can eliminate that here. Again, that offset is taken off at the top and the bottom of the site. So you're basically shortening the site by 10 meters here by specifying 5. Okay, that's the RBT for EMAP input file. Do note that the structure of this file is changing. Keep an eye on the website for changing definitions, and that there are other versions of this file for different RBT purposes. I've tried to focus here on the version that's used by the RBT for EMAP.